And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 16. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a wedding photographer from Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey, and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking all about fears and the unrational thoughts that we have when confronting something new or challenging. I really come at this topic with a pretty fresh perspective, having just started on a new endeavour into wedding photography. I know all too well about the fears that can hold us back and the negative thoughts that can sometimes cripple us. So today, I want to share with you guys 9 steps that have really helped me to control my fears whenever starting something new. But before I spill all those juicy steps, let's jump into what has been happening for me this past week. And as you may have heard the little change in the intro of this week's podcast, I am now officially a wedding photographer. I shot my first wedding last weekend, and I must say that was just a great experience for me. It's been something that I've been wanting to do now for quite a long time, to be honest. It's been something that I've always had in the back of my mind, and I know I've spoken about this a lot on the podcast, but it just feels like such a big step that I've finally crossed that hurdle, and it's just something that was holding me back for a long time about not wanting to start in wedding photography and having those fears, and I think that's why we're speaking a little bit about that today. But I really wanted to discuss it a bit with you guys and sort of go through a few of the things that came up for me across the weekend and a few of the fears that were very unrational and a few of the things that I was thinking would go wrong that just were smooth sailing. So I wanted to jump into a few of those things today. I think one of the first things that came up was that I always expect that other people will have the same expectations that I do, and that inherently would involve them having the same understanding that I do around photography. Now, I feel as if not everyone is as educated in photography as I expect them to be, and I think that is because I am in the profession and I sort of live and breathe the craft. So I have some sort of expectation that other people will understand what I'm talking about, mostly because of the rise of the photography area with Instagram and things like that. I feel like everyone nowadays sort of knows a little bit about photography and knows a little bit about the different things that go in behind that. But I'm always surprised by how little understanding there is around it, but also how little people actually care. Because for me, I'm someone who really cares about quality photography. So of course, I'm going to have higher expectations than other people, but a lot of people that I've actually spoken to don't really have those expectations and are just happy to have those memories captured. And I think that is something that I've always come to the profession with, is not being too overly staged in photos and not taking too overly stylized photos, because I don't think those are going to portray very well in 10 to 15 years when you look back on them. I don't think those are the memories that you're going to want to remember. So I'm trying to approach this new endeavor of mine with those set of eyes that I want to be creating the memories because I know who I'm creating them for. And overall, I want the whole experience to be a great one for the client and for them to know that I'm there for them. I'm not there for myself. I don't want to walk in and just take the style of photos that I enjoy. I'm there to take photos for them and sort of reading that understanding from them that they don't really want stylized photos. They don't really care for all the technical aspects. Makes it a lot more comforting on my part to know that I can just take the style of photos that they would like, and I know that I'm going to be able to do a good job at the end of the day. One of the other amazing things about shooting a wedding for me was knowing that I was able to sort of stand back and take that documentary style that I've been speaking about for the past few weeks here on the podcast, because overall, wedding photography isn't an overly interactive profession. You know, I spent most of the day sort of out of interaction with anyone else, just standing back, taking photos and moving around myself. So I spent most of the day by myself, which is sort of opposed to the type of photography that I'm used to, I guess, in that going out and taking photos and working directly with clients and sort of being able to pose them and stage them and things like that. Whereas here, I actually had something that I knew I was taking photos of. And in that way, it made it a lot easier, one, to be a little bit more creative with the types of photos that I was taking, because I knew I had the time, but I also knew I had the free range of being able to move around and actually come up with different styles that I really wanted to create. But also I knew that there was less pressure because I didn't have to be able to stage anything. The whole moments were happening in front of me throughout the whole day, you know? And so that really was an upside, I guess, into having to shoot the whole wedding day. I know I spoke last week on last week's episode about the shoot that I did last weekend with a couple that went for about 3 hours. And that for me was very mentally draining because it was working in close contact with them for that amount of time and being able to stage photos and have ideas on the spot and sort of move them as we go. Whereas this, I was there for 8-9 hours for the whole day, but it didn't really feel as if it was an 8 or 9 hour day. It really felt quite smooth. And in the end, I was very happy with the way it went because I was able to give myself breaks whilst taking photos. And that was always something that I really strived to be able to do, but it also allowed me to be much happier and be much calmer and be able to work through the types of photos that I really wanted to take. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it was all smooth sailing for the day. There were obviously things that did come up through the day that I was unprepared for, but I think on a whole, it was a great learning experience for me because there's only so much you can learn from other people or from online or through reading books or things like that. You have to really gain experience in the field. And for me, that really came about through last weekend. I know I spoke about there being no sort of pressure placed on me because I wasn't really there as a hired photographer. I was really working for free, but that still gave me a lot of experience and it sort of showed me a lot of different things that I wasn't prepared for and a lot of different scenarios where I had to sort of learn on the go and sort of make things up and switch and change things that I wasn't ready for, but now I am for the next time. And I feel like I've really come away from that with so much more experience and so much weight, I think, lifted off my shoulders in knowing that I can perform under those circumstances and I can actually produce good work and work that other people are actually thinking is great as well, because it's not all about how I think I'm performing on the day, but it's also about how other people think I'm performing as well. It's an interesting thing when you walk into a wedding because you're being hired by one person, but you're there working, taking photos of all different types of people. And so other people are genuinely going to have their opinions on what they think you should do or who you should take photos of or how you should take photos. But at the end of the day, you're only working for the couple that's getting married. So you've really got to only worry about them and having known what they want to have photos of. But it's also nice in the way that there are other people there that you can sort of gauge how their experience is based off what other people are trying to say about you and what other people are saying and what other people are thinking of the work that you're trying to do. I had quite a few people come up to me and say that they were surprised that I was actually there for the first time on the weekend shooting my first wedding because it looked like I knew what I was trying to do, which is a great compliment from them because I don't really think I knew much at all what I was doing. I was sort of just running around all over the place like I'd had my head cut off. But I'm glad that I portrayed that sort of feeling that I did know what I was talking about and that people could see that based on the photography work that I was trying to do, I actually knew and had some sort of understanding. And so then that was able to build some sense of trust in the work that I was able to do, and so that no one else would have to come up and say anything to me to sort of direct me in one direction or another. And yeah, I think overall the whole day was a great success. Obviously, I have quite a fair bit of editing to do now, but I'm glad to be able to do the editing. I've always felt that editing was something that I could take my own sort of pace on and work at home and work on at home and sort of take my time with it and be able to perfect the photos there. But I really feel like what happened through the day and the photos that I was able to take were some really good ones that I'm really excited to see where they get to and be able to put them online for you guys to be able to see those. And so I don't want to really harp on about the day too much more than that, but I just wanted to be able to bring that up because I know a few of you guys were interested about how that was going to go last weekend. But now I want to just backtrack a little bit to last week's episode and really touch on a few points that came up to me after recording last week's episode. I'm not sure if you guys have heard it. If you haven't yet, do recommend going and having a listen to that. I have seen quite a few people have already listened to it overnight. That episode only came out yesterday as I'm recording this episode, so I've seen quite a few people have already listened to that episode. But a few things came up to me in the fact that how hard that episode was to record. And it really struck a chord with me because most of these episodes seem fairly easy in a way for me to just speak to the microphone and know what I'm talking about. But last week's episode, I felt like there was a big pressure to make that episode something that it really didn't need to be. It was always a topic that I wanted to speak about, and anything about finances has always been something that I've been very passionate about trying to get out there and trying to be more open with. But in that same vein, I knew that there would be a lot of pressure and a lot of people would probably have things to say about an episode in that sort of style. And so I put too much pressure on myself to make a great episode. And in the end, I don't actually think I did the episode justice. So I hope you guys did enjoy it, but I just wanted to put that out there that was such a struggle for me to be able to make that episode. And I'm not really sure why. And I think that really is something that I'm going to have to look into, and why that I struggle to speak about it. And I think I certainly addressed a few of those points within the episode, actually saying a few of the reasons why most people don't really talk about it. And I think I hold some of those opinions and sort of views myself. So it really came through to me after the episode that how hard it was to actually make. I think that it also piled on top of the fact that I was just exhausted last week, and I really got to Tuesday and was questioning whether I should record the episode. I had a lot of other work to do and wondering whether I should just move it back a few days and record it a bit later. But I decided to record on the Tuesday like I always do. And I'm glad that I did, because it gave me time to be able to edit it and be able to have it up by the Monday. But it really came back to that, and I was really drained and exhausted. So hopefully you guys were able to take something away from that. And I do hope to hear from a few of you about what you actually thought of that episode. But as a whole, I hope that it could have started a conversation. And if not, I think I'm going to continue that conversation on this podcast in a few episodes' time, and sort of be able to continue that as a recurring theme of this podcast. Now, we did have a bit of a success story over this past week in that I hit 100 downloads on the podcast. I know I'm up to episode 15, so to only hit 100 downloads may not seem like a lot, but I was fairly thrilled about that, because there was a big spike, and there has been a big increase over the past 2 to 3 weeks of people actually listening to the podcast. It was fairly flat in the first 10 episodes, and I knew that would be the case, and I knew that I couldn't expect anyone to sort of jump on the podcast as early as it was and be able to sit through an episode. I wouldn't be able to go back and sit through any of those first few episodes, because they would just be super hard to listen to and hard work for anyone to actually listen to. But I think now, moving on, I feel like I'm starting to get into the groove, and I was glad to see that so many people are actually tuning in and actually listening to the episodes and actually gaining things from them. I've heard from quite a few people about how much this podcast has helped them, and how much they've been enjoying actually listening to episodes, whether that be them actually taking things from the stories that I tell, or taking things from the sort of styles of topics that I talk about. But I'm just so glad that people are able to take anything away from this podcast, and it really encourages me to continue on in producing these episodes, because it is hard to gauge where the impact is and where the motivation is to continue, I guess, because you're not really seeing who is actually listening to the episodes. You're not really hearing from a lot of different people. So to have an increase in the downloads last week, I think really helped, and having so many people actually message me and reach out and tell me how much the podcast really means to them really helps. And I'm really glad that I'm able to put this out there in the world. And it is something that I really do enjoy, being able to come sit down here on a Tuesday and just be able to speak for half hour to an hour and really get my thoughts out on some things that I'm interested in, but I think other people are equally as interested in, and that's really good to see. And so with that out of the way, I want to jump into today's episode. And as you heard in the intro and read in the title, it's all about overcoming your fears. And this idea really stemmed from me stepping into wedding photography, and really the journey that it took me to actually get to that point where I was comfortable actually starting there, because there was a big fear that held me back. And there's always been fears that have held me back in a lot of different things, but I think there have been a lot of ways in which I've been able to overcome those fears and really push myself through it. And I've always found that once I get to the other side, it's such a relief, and I feel grateful that I've been able to push through a lot of the different things. And you look back on some of the things that you were concerned about before, and they don't really seem to be as concerning now. And it's easy to look back in hindsight, but I want to sort of give you guys some of the ideas and some of the sort of methods that I've used along the journey to really work with my fears and be able to use them in a constructive way, but also use them and use my own thoughts to be able to get around some of the things that I have been fearful of, and really educate myself on ways that I can use those in my advantage. So really, I think the first thing that I always come to when I get scared of something, of actually starting a new thing or starting in an area, is really to work out whether it's actually a fear or not. You know, I like to be able to sit on ideas for a small amount of time. You know, I don't like to be able to sit on them forever. I don't think that's a great idea. And if you came to me and said you had an idea that you've been really trying to start for the past 3 years, you know, that would be quite a long period of time. And if you haven't really acted upon them, then you'd start to question whether you're actually interested in it or not, and whether it's a fear or whether you are just not interested in it at all, and whether you're too scared to start because you know it's going to be hard work rather than something you're actually scared of. So I like to take a little bit of time, but not obviously too much, but a little bit of time to sort of see whether an idea I have is actually a fear, and whether I'm actually scared of the idea, or whether, as I said, it's just something that is way too hard or out of the scope of something that I would really like to do. You know, I have all different sorts of ideas of things that I would love to be able to do, but I just don't have the time to be able to do them, and things that probably are just stupid ideas that I think, oh, that'd be a great idea. I can spend a few weeks on that, and then it'll just end up going by the wayside anyway. So I'm probably better off not to invest the first 3 weeks, because I really want to make sure my heart is in it before I start it. And so that's why I say take a bit of time to sort of work out whether it is a fear or not, because some things you're not always scared of based on the outcome of what the end product is going to be. Some things you're more scared of the actual journey that you're going to have to go on, and the time and the money that you're going to have to invest in being able to produce an idea like this. You know, for me, starting in wedding photography, I was never scared of the amount of time that I knew it was going to take to be able to build up a career. That was never a fear for me. I think there are fears around, as I said last week, the types of financial support that I would have along that journey. But I think for me, the fear was more around the actual task at hand and actually going to shoot a wedding, because I'd never thought I was up to that. It was never a fear around whether I could actually achieve it or not, because I knew I had the skills, but I had to sort of take time and realize whether this was actually something that I really wanted to do, and whether it was something that was going to drive my career and my plans forward, or whether it was just an idea that I had offhand and I was scared to start it because I didn't know what people would think about it, or I didn't know whether it would be a great idea long term. And so then the second step, and the one that I think is a very important step here, is once you realize that a fear is something that you want to do, is to give that fear a voice, because too many people will shut fears down. And I think that fears, in a way, can be a very constructive thing. If you're scared of something, that means that you're invested in it enough to actually care about the outcome. And I think that in itself is a very good thing, because if you don't care about the outcome, if you don't care how something is going to play out, and if you don't care how it's going to impact on you in your life, then it's probably not the best thing for you to be trying to do, you know? So yeah, actually give your fear a voice, but at the end of the day, don't give it the deciding vote. You know, don't allow it to control the outcome or the next step that you take, but hear yourself out and hear the things that you're scared of, and then often sometimes head in the opposite direction, because if you are scared of it, maybe you need to head towards it, and don't hear what your fears are trying to tell you. Don't try and steer away from something that might actually be of benefit to you. Actually, if your fears are trying to tell you to not do something, maybe the best course of action is to go and actually do something about it, because if you're scared of something, it probably means that it's a good thing to do for you. And so then the next step that I often go through, and I think quite a lot of people go through, is actually write the thing down. It's so important to be able to have goals, and I like to have very tangible goals. And in a way to do that is to be able to write them down and be able to keep myself accountable towards those goals. But it's not always just writing it down so that you have something to keep yourself accountable. It's also writing it down so you can actually see it on paper. I think being able to see a goal or something that you're scared of starting on paper, I think makes it look a lot less scary. And if you write it down, and as I said in the first step, take a few days and go away and think about it, you come back in 3 days and you read that thing on the bit of paper again, and you think, why was I scared of it in the first place? You know, it's there in the words that how you would describe it. And when you come back, if those words don't make sense to you and you think, why would that be something that I'd be scared of? Or why is this such a big thing? I think writing something down can make it seem less scary, because you've seen it written down before. You've seen other people talk about it. You've seen other people, maybe you've seen other people write about it. And in that way, it sort of relates it to things that aren't as scary, or things that you know other people have been able to do. So why are you so scared of this? And that's sort of the reason why I would say to write it down and sort of write it before you take that break, and write it and step away from it. Maybe it's something that an idea you've just had and you just put that idea down on a bit of paper. It might be something that you're super scared, but you're okay to write it down on a bit of paper, and then you put that piece of paper in your drawer. You don't come back to it for another week. And then when you then come back and check that idea, it's going to look a lot less intimidating to you then, because it's written down and it's not just a thought that you just had spur of the moment right then. After you've written it down, the next step that I would probably go on is to be able to rationalize it. And this is the sort of question that I like to ask myself is, what is the worst that can happen? It's all about sort of knowing what is the worst outcome that could happen if you pursue something that you're scared of. For me, trying to start in wedding photography, what was the worst case scenario? The worst case was that I advertise, I put the word out there, and I don't ever hear a response back. I continue to advertise for months on end, and I never hear back from anyone because no one thinks I'm a good photographer. That's probably worst case scenario. Then maybe the next worst case scenario is I do actually hear back from someone, and I go and shoot their wedding, and it all goes bad. I don't take any photos at all my equipment breaks, or all my memory cards just start to turn off and all shut down, and I just lose all the photos completely like that, and they're really annoyed at me. That might be the next worst case scenario in my books. And the reason I say it's important to think about these worst case scenarios is not because I want you to become scared of them or to have these sort of turn you away, because in and of themselves, if these were actually going to happen, they would be fairly scary things. But then the important thing is to write those down, but then ask the next question, which is, well, what's the chance that those things could actually happen? And it's all about working out the severity of the bad thing that could happen versus the chance of that thing actually happening. And I think you'll find that when the severity is very high, the chance of it happening is very low. And so for me, the chance of me advertising for a whole year and never hearing back from anyone, any friends or family or anyone out there in the world, was unlikely to happen. Like, let's be real. That was a very low chance, because I'm sure there would have been someone who would have been happy to take me up on my offer. And then the next worst thing that could happen is that I then do go to a wedding, but the chance of all my camera equipment all of a sudden just turning off is very unlikely to happen, And we have things in place that can overcome that. So then it becomes even less likely to happen that all of it would turn off. I have extra equipment so that if something does happen, it's there, and I can have that as well, because we know bad things do happen. But what's the chance of everything that I have all of a sudden breaking? That's not very likely at all. So where does these fears come from? Because these are in the smallest minority. And I have to keep telling myself that, because the chance of these big things actually happening is very small. And for other small things that could happen, the chance of them happening might be high, but they're only a small severity. So we can work around that. Interesting story. I went to shoot some photos last weekend, and I accidentally shot all the photos in a 16:9 aspect ratio. So I was taking all the photos in a smaller image size than I actually really wanted to, and I didn't actually realize that until I got home and had to edit all the photos. So the edge of the frames had all been chopped off. But at the end of the day, we could work around that. I could sort of be able to frame them. I could edit those so it didn't look too bad. It was only in a select few of the photos. It didn't happen to every single photo, but for about half of them sort of went that way. And that was something that the chance of that happening is probably higher than anything else that I've said today. But the overall severity, when that did happen, I was able to work around that. And I was able to come back with still an end product that I was very happy with. So things can happen, and we know that things can happen, but the chance of something really bad happening is not very high. And being able to rationalize that to yourself is super important in those early stages. Then after you've done that, the fifth thing that I would say is to stay positive. And I really had to keep driving this home to myself, because I can often jump to conclusions that just aren't true. And so being able to stay positive and keeping that positive talk is so important, because at the end of the day, I'm probably more capable than I actually think I am, and I actually have the skills to be able to produce the work that I know that people expect. So being able to tell myself that and assure myself that I can, because I have in the past, these are things that I've done before. And just because the scenario is changing doesn't mean that the actual skills required actually inherently change, because they really don't. So being able to tell myself those sort of things and being able to make sure that I know that I'm capable, and keeping the talk and my internal dialogue very sort of positive, because if I was to continue to bag myself out and say how bad I was, or continue to tell myself that the chance of these unlikely things happening was very high, then of course I'm going to be stressed out about it. But I have to keep reminding myself, and I think the proof is that I have gone out before. I'm trying to prove to other people that I'm able to go do this work, so I need to internally prove it to myself and stay very positive about the things that I have done before, and reflect on those and use those to my advantage, because they really do show me that I am able to go out there and do this sort of work and produce quality results. After that, it's not just about believing in yourself, but it's also about educating yourself. One of the things that I was really scared about moving into wedding photography was the fact that I had never actually been to a wedding before. I hadn't been to a wedding in my whole life, so how was I to know how the whole day was meant to run? I was 100% determined that I was just going to screw it up because I wouldn't know where I needed to be at what time of the day. I wouldn't know where I needed to be to take a specific photo. I didn't know what specific photos to actually be able to produce. I didn't know what sort of photos people expected from a wedding. So I really had to educate myself on all those sorts of things. And that is not something that's outside of the scope of things that I'm able to do. That is very much in my control, and I had to take that even further into my control and actually go and apply myself and actually go and do the work and research about this sort of stuff. You know, I'd never been to a wedding before, so it was the first thing I did. I went online and just looked one up on YouTube. I was there for an hour and I watched the whole ceremony, so I knew what things happened at what stages. It may seem like a bit of a weird thing to do, but afterwards I was way more prepared than I was before. And these are things that we can do and can learn about. And it's all about this sort of stuff and exposing yourself to the right type of things. If you're going to want to go start a podcast, maybe the first step is actually to tune into a few podcasts and hear what they're actually like. You know, if you've never listened to a podcast before, it's going to be really hard to start your own. Maybe the next step is go and actually watch a behind the scenes podcast and see how it's actually recorded. You know, you've got to be exposed to this type of things before. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that you need to learn in any particular one way or another. Everyone learns in a different way. And if that meant that I had to go down to the church on a weekend and walk into a random wedding, then that's what I would have had to do in order to educate myself on the things that I needed to educate myself on before walking in to someone else's actual wedding day and being tasked with a duty, having as much responsibility as being their photographer. And that's really been the thing that I've always lived by, is educate yourself as much as you can. It's not about always the technical aspects either. It's about how to engage with people, how to talk to people, how to have those interactions before the whole thing happens, before you start out on the journey, but also through it as well. You know, you might be technically the best at that craft, but if you don't know the other relational aspects that go into that as well, then you're never going to be able to execute on that one thing. So educating yourself in all different aspects of that one thing can really help and drive you forward and help you gain a lot of confidence moving into that thing. And then after you've educated yourself, the next step is to then start talking about it and start breeding these ideas that you've just had and use this newfound knowledge to educate other people or talk to friends and family about it. If people are asking a specific question related to that area that you're interested in, maybe add a bit into the conversation. You know, every time that you can speak about something, you're exposing yourself to that different thing. You know, if someone asks you a question about it and you can respond, that's helping you to engage in it and it's helping it to become more in your memory. You know, if I was going to try and learn something like the structure of how a wedding day happens, if someone asked me about a specific thing on a wedding day, I answer that question, I've then inserted it into my mind again. I've started thinking about it. I'm exposing myself to those ideas. So being able to expose yourself and talk about things and be able to have different things out there in the world, whether it is on social media or wherever, on a podcast like this, being able to talk about it allows you to sort of get those thoughts down and really understand what it is that you've just learned. And then I think the last step is to just jump in. You've already gone through all this. You already have enough understanding of what needs to be done. You already have the skills. We've spoken about that. You already got the skills from before. And if you don't have the skills, take the time to learn the skills. You know, maybe don't start from the top. Start down below and learn the skills up. And when you get to that point where you can actually just jump in. You know, there's no point hanging on. There's no point saying that you really want to start something for 3 years and turning around in 3 years' time and just saying, well, I'm not prepared yet. I really haven't done that yet. I haven't taken that first step. You may as well jump in. And what's the worst thing that can happen? As I said in the first step, you're always going to have fears. And fears are a good thing. I don't think you're ever going to stop being scared or nervous of something. And if you do ever stop being scared or nervous about something, then maybe you're in it for the wrong reasons. And maybe you're not there for the right reasons, you know? After I've photographed 100 weddings, I hope to still be scared to turn up to the next one because everyone is very unique and I'm still there working for someone else. And all these things that have a chance of happening could still happen. Just because I've got all the experience in the world, things could still happen. And so I never want to get to a point where I'm not scared or nervous, but I want to learn ways to be able to use that to my advantage and overcome those things to be able to put myself out there, because I think when you can overcome fears and when you can step around your anxieties around things, I think being able to overcome that, I think that's a great feeling. And that is something that I strive for and always gives me so much reward in really knowing that I've executed on a plan, on a goal that I've had, that there was something standing in the way, but I was able to jump that. And that's why this week really feels like a big thing for me, having gone and photographed my first wedding, because that was something that I've been planning for so long and been so stressed about. But now, having jumped over it, I feel like I'm 80% of the way there now. I started at 10% the other day, and now I've jumped so far. It's just, when you jump that first hurdle, the next ones, the momentum that you get allows you to continue on forward. And I hope that I can continue with this for a long time to come. And I can't see why anything else could stop me now, because I've got that experience, and now I know the steps that I've just outlined that are always going to be there if ever I get stuck or held back by one of my own fears or anxieties around anything moving forward. And so I'm very excited for this next journey, and I hope that you guys have really used this and are able to use this episode to help you on journeys that you're trying to take on, and things that you're scared about starting, and things that you're really fearful of, because we're all scared of things, and there are never going to be a time when you aren't scared or nervous about something. So I hope that this episode and these sort of things can really help you guys in moving through those and sort of overcoming, or maybe even moving on to the next step, because that's all we can do is take it one step at a time. And I'm glad that I was able to outline some of the things that have really worked for me in this episode. And so, guys, that is where I'm going to leave this week's episode. I really do hope you did enjoy it. As much as I enjoyed recording it, this one was much easier to record than last week's episode, and I really had a ball recording this episode. I really do enjoy every episode that I record, and I'm 16 weeks in now, and this really feels like we've got a lot of momentum up, and I'm really excited to continue driving on through this year. And I hope you guys are going to be here along for the ride and continue learning about the creative journey that I'm on, but also being able to take your own creative journey and take journeys in your own life in all different aspects of things, and using the things that I'm talking about to propel you forward. And so one last thing before I do leave you today, guys, I would just love it if any of you could be able to share this podcast around with any friends and family members who you may think would enjoy this style of podcast at all. If you've gained anything from this episode and you can think of anyone else who you think would gain something from it as well, I would love it if you would share the podcast with them and really give them a reason why you think that they would enjoy this podcast as well, and sort of share a few of the things that I've been talking about. And if that interests them, then I would love to have them here with me as well on this journey, and being able to hear everything that we're up to moving forward, because the podcast continues to grow, and I'm not surprised by that, because the people who are listening are very engaged, and I always hear from you guys, and I know the type of people who are listening are the type who will go out there and share this podcast with people, because they've been able to gain so much from it. And I'm so glad that I've been able to provide information to other people. This is always something that I really wanted to do, and I'm really glad now that I've been able to sort of build this audience here every week. And I know the people who have been coming back every week, and it really does make me so happy that I've been able to put this out there in the world. And I would love the opportunity to be able to extend this audience to anyone else who you think would be at all interested in this podcast. So if I could just ask one thing, guys, that would be all it would be from you. But if not, that is okay. I'm just glad that you are along here listening to these episodes, and I hope that you are able to gain something from that. And so have a great week, guys, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.